Right. So welcome to our Friday conversation, our Friday roundtable. My name is Ruth Nicholson. I split my time between Team Genius and Go. With Team Genius, I'm one of the trainers and coaches that help our clients do evaluations for players and coaches and referees and whatever else you can think of to evaluate. In my other world, I work with sports organizations through the Go program in terms of helping boards of directors, owners, administrators make their organizations work well, so they can provide really good experiences for their players and their coaches. Along with me, I've got Gabe Skelly. He's our customer success manager here at Team Genius. When he is not chasing around his 4 kids, he actually works with a lot of different sports in a lot of different places and a couple of different continents, and tends to know kind of what's hot and what's not in the sports world. So let me tell you what we're going to do for the next hour. Every week we invite you to give us your questions, your ideas, your concerns, and then I try to bunch them up so that we can talk about them. This week, the most popular questions and concerns had to do with waivers and insurance. So we've invited a couple of folks to join us who know about waivers and insurance. Catherine Knorr is here from the beautiful island of Oahu. And Adam Manning, I haven't seen him yet, but he also works with sports organizations finding the right insurance product for their needs. We also had a number of questions about membership and engagement and communicating with members. And lastly, the topic that comes up every week, which is all around returning to play. What's that looking like, and sort of catching up on what information has come out since last week that's going to help us figure out how to get back on the field in the gym and doing things that we really love. So with that, Skelly, start us off with good news. What do you have to celebrate this week?
Exciting things, just working with clubs. It seems like people are starting to get more and more into communicating with their players, and seeing a lot of people really doing a lot around giving players options to train at home. And one of the clubs I was just talking to earlier today, and the first one that I'd heard of it, and just kind of wanted to see what they got for metrics, but they are they canceling part of their season, but they messaged all the families. I think it was like 400 or 500 families, and said, we're still having our coaches train over Zoom meetings, and they're doing very intricate Zoom meetings where the coaches are, doing the training sessions, but watching the kids train at home through their webcam. So giving them feedback instantaneously on what they're doing. And what this organization did is they said, if you guys want, you can donate a portion or all of your fees to, the coaches essentially, so they can keep being paid. And they only had, I don't know, they said like a third of their people respond so far. They just started kind of putting this out there. And at least 30% so far have said, yeah, let's do that. We'll just pay our fees and we can go to paying the coaches. And the guy that I was talking to said a couple of people, the parents were even fine just keeping renewing. They've set it up as a monthly fee thing, and they're fine just paying to support the coaches, and they're training their kids while they're not on the field right now. So I thought that was pretty cool. So
if you hang around Gabe, you will realize he's one of the most positive people you will have in your life. So let's jump into waivers and insurance. It really was top of mind for a lot of you this week. And Catherine's here. And Catherine, I know you've been working on waivers with some clubs right now as they sort of figure out what do you do with illness. What changes are you seeing in waivers right now as you're working with clubs?
Well, one thing that did come to mind, Gabe, when you talked about doing...
it really was top of mind for a lot of you this week. And Catherine's here, and...
What happened there?
I don't know.
Anyway, Gabe just spoke about training over Zoom or video, and it occurs to me that it probably wouldn't be unreasonable to have a liability waiver that covers that. There are added risks to people being trained or doing the activity in another location. So an updated liability waiver that considers the fact that they will potentially have other obstacles. Like, for example, you would consider what their environment would be in that situation. So there might be a wide range of environment. But when you're looking at liability waivers and applying it to COVID-19, then you're looking at some issues that I think, of course, we never anticipated ever in our lifetimes before now. And one thing that that you have to kind of evaluate when you're looking at your particular waiver and editing it and changing it and modifying it. And certainly I would advise you to have counsel to do this, because every state is different and every state interprets different aspects of liability waivers differently. And so you would look at what the potential risks are. And when you're doing the assumption of risk portion of the liability waiver, then there would be a need to determine what those potential risks are. And what we've added to this is obviously the potential of contracting COVID-19 through doing that particular activity. That's the added element. So that would be added as a potential risk. And so in working with clients, and I do work with different events and different activities, you know, and in kind of doing my little edit of their waivers and looking at what they're doing, I ask a lot of questions about their activity and what they anticipate and how they anticipate addressing these issues. And so when you're looking at in-person events versus virtual events, because there's going to be two different things. If you have, like, for example, I had an event where we changed it from an actual in-person event to a virtual event because of COVID-19. We had to think about, like, people were no longer necessarily in Hawaii. They would be in other climates. They would be participating in running outside in climates that would be potentially cold as opposed to humid and hot in Hawaii. And so we had to anticipate that in editing that in my counsel to them. So when I looked at the documents that they had, I had to brainstorm about what they were facing. And because I've actually written a book on sports risk management, it's a textbook. And so I have, not only do I address legal, but I always look at risk management issues. And so I look at that. But okay, so you have different things. You have training people when they're in their homes and not in an environment you're even familiar with. You have virtual events where you're not even familiar with the environment that they're training in, and you're just speculating as to what that is and what the risks are. And then you have return to play liability waiver, where you do know what the potential risks are and what the environment is. And so there's really three possible elements. There may even be more, but those are the ones that come to mind now. And they all have to be considered when you look at this.
Yeah. What are others doing in terms of waivers? Are you dealing with them right now, or are you still wondering about how to deal with them right now? Anyone? Adam, I know you're...
wants to can type in the chat or unmute yourself if you want to.
Right. I know we have Adam on the phone. Adam, are you seeing things from your vantage point around waivers and insurance right now? What's new? Okay. So Rick says we're in the process of creating them and being proactive. Thank you, Rick. What are others doing when it comes to waivers? Or maybe you just have questions still. Gandalf?
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Gandalf French. We've been researching the applicability of waivers. Waivers sound great in theory. I guess the concern is, do they actually, or will they actually give us any protection from the risks and liability side of things? Because, I think Catherine mentioned, it's just, there's so many unknowns still at this point. And the idea that we're going to be returning to normal is such a far away, idea. I think really the process for us is still centered around, is it going to even help us? Is it something that can protect us from the liability side?
May I answer that?
Yeah, go.
Okay. I would never run an athletic event without a liability waiver. And in about 45 states, they will protect from, and actually possibly more, from injuries that are inherent in the particular activity, as well as for simple negligence. Liability waivers will probably not protect you if it's willful, wanton, or intentional, or other pretty egregious actions. But I think that most activities, events, sporting clubs, they are more concerned with simple negligence and injuries that arise out of those activities that are inherent in the event. And I'll tell you from my own experience, I represented an athlete who was injured actually, he was killed I represented the athlete who was sued in a wrongful death action that the incident occurred in a triathlon. And the person who died actually tried to pass him on the bike. And my client kind of wavered back and forth because this other guy was trying to pass him. Their handlebars clipped, and my guy kind of went back and forth, and he was able to right himself. The other guy fell and went into the road and was hit by a car and died. And what was interesting about it is my client had a homeowner's insurance policy. What I would have expected in that particular situation is that I would have expected the plaintiff's attorney, who was very, very well-known, good attorney, I would have expected him to file a lawsuit against the race director, possibly USA Triathlon, possibly others. However, he did not even file against them. And the only reason I believe he didn't is because they were named in the liability waiver. So I believe that the liability waiver in that particular case and in other cases actually serve as protection, in that the plaintiff's attorneys filing lawsuits sometimes just figures, oh, I'm not going to win on that. They'll file a motion for summary judgment and they'll be dismissed. So I'm not going to waste my time and money. So they won't even file the lawsuit against them at all. So I think that that's one form of protection. However, what a liability waiver is a defense to a lawsuit, because anyone can sue. And that's why you have insurance, to provide defense and indemnity. However, if you are sued, hopefully you have insurance that will pay for your defense. Then your attorney can file a motion for summary judgment and claim that they've assumed the risk and that they waived, that liability was waived against these specified people or parties or organizers.
Thank you. We've got some stuff.
Can I follow up briefly, please?
Yeah, sure, do that.
So I wanted to clarify. So we do have liability waivers in place that cover all of the typical sport assumed kind of risks that are inherent with any kind of contact sport or even our sport specifically. I think what I was implying or attempting to imply had more to do with what you were saying about the type of negligence and whether or not by allowing, encouraging, or having our players return to play, we can be categorized as not just simple negligence through accident, but willful in terms of we know that there is a risk here and we're going to do it anyway. And so that's really for me where that distinction is, and that's what I'm trying to understand from an organizational and also from a coach's standpoint, because like many people, I have multiple hats. If those kind of distinctions can be covered in this situation as it relates to the virus.
Well, I understand that. I think any organization wants to do their best not to do anything intentionally to hurt their players or any participants. And I think most organizations would do everything that they could to manage those risks so that they don't have any willful or wanton or extreme negligence behavior. When I look at COVID-19, for example, let's just say that you have measures in place to protect your athletes, and you have soccer, which is probably pretty common for many of you. Okay, so before the players are allowed to play, they either have to have their temperature taken, or they have to, certify that they took their temperature in the last 48 hours, and they have to report this in some way to the coach before they're allowed to play, and that they have to maintain social distance, and they have to do certain things. They have to wash their hands. Everyone has to wash their hands for 20 seconds before they play. The ball is sanitized, and that they have to wash their hands at specific intervals throughout play or something like that. I mean, you have these things. Let's just say someone shows up and they clearly have a temperature. Their temperature is over 100. And the coach knows of this and goes, you know what? I don't even care. I'm going to let them play anyway. That might rise to a level of a higher level of negligence other than simple. And that could be a problem. And that comes with you establish your guidelines and your procedures, but then you have to enforce those. And so if you're not enforcing your procedures, your rules, your guidelines, it's possible that it could be construed in court as something other than simple negligence. So I think that that's something to be concerned with. But I think the way you deal with that in terms of the way the liability waiver is there as a fairly inexpensive and easy way to protect you as a defense if something goes wrong and a lawsuit is filed. However, on the front lines, how you're handling your risk management on a day-to-day basis, that is your main protection against liability.
All right. We've got a number of comments and some questions here in the chat. Fraser Valley Volleyball says they're waiting right now. They don't have any programs until September, but they do need advice and they need to find support in Canada. So we have a number of Canadian cousins on the line with us today. Dawson says they're working with other statewide youth baseball and softball organizations in order to create clear, concise, and consistent waivers for their participants in Minnesota. Jennifer, I believe Jennifer is a hockey gal. We're waiting for guidance on what additional measures due to COVID-19 might be required by our facilities and our sport. And then, she is hockey, I remembered. Carol is asking, what's the legality around electronic waivers? Are they the same as if it's signed in person?
That's actually a good question. My clients generally have electronic waivers, and I think you'd have to look at your particular state law on that. But I don't think, I think generally it's okay. It's a pretty normal way of doing business. Think of active.com. All of their events pretty much are have a liability waiver on them, and you have to scroll through it and then accept or do a signature, electronic signature. And so many other things that we do in our lives require an accept, for terms of service and things. Remember, it's only a defense, and what will happen is whether the liability waiver is presented and signed in person or whether it's presented and signed electronically, generally, the defense, the plaintiff will assert that it was, the print was too small. They didn't read it because it was just presented to them and they didn't have time to read it. If they go on and sign electronically beforehand, there's a better argument that you can't claim you didn't have time. You had it in front of you and you had to scroll down. It was presumed that if you're an adult and you signed for your child, that you read it and understood it. In fact, I always write mine. I write, something to the effect that read before signing on the top in big letters. And, I have all these things that I do to make that argument, to return that argument. But so I think it's fine, but it is always good to check with the applicable law in your state or your province. For Canada, I think that I would particularly look at what the laws in Canada are in relation to what you're doing.
Right. Couple of questions from Troy. Troy Pearson is here with us from Positive Coaching Alliance in Minnesota. And one of his questions is, are there templates that you can use to draft waivers that make it a little easier?
Okay. I absolutely recommend an attorney drafting your liability waiver. If you use a template, you're not considering state law. And I make it easier for people by just doing a kind of a low flat rate for people who I work with, because I get that they're going to go on if they can't afford to have an attorney do it, they're going to go on the internet and find something. And it may or may not work because it might not apply to their particular situation at all, because there's very specific things that you need to have in a liability waiver for every single activity you do. And that's the key. And if you hire an attorney, then make sure that attorney has some knowledge about liability waivers and in the particular activity that you are offering. Because if they don't ask the right questions, they may be doing the same thing that you would be doing and not have the right information. So it has to be specific to the sport, specific to the state, specific to the type of activity that you're doing.
Okay, sport, location, and activity. Last question before we move on to some other things. what if you're a club or an organization that rents facilities from a city or a school district or a parks department, how does that work with waivers if you're falling under a city's waiver or a school district's waiver? How do those things mesh together?
Okay, you'll probably want your own for what you're doing, because you want to make sure that it protects you and your organization, your sponsors, your volunteers, your employees, because you want to specifically list all of those. I actually I find out the name, I put the sponsors' names, I put everyone I can put in there in the liability waiver, and I specifically include every possible risk and possible activity. But in terms of renting facilities, and they have their liability waiver, sometimes they'll ask you to add you as a additional insured, which is kind of usual. And then, you can always name them on your liability waiver, and they could name you on theirs. But as long, I wouldn't worry so much about theirs. I would worry more about your own.
All right, thank you. Wonderful questions. Thank you. So let's go to the second question that came in. Was about engaging your members and membership, and trying to persuade people to support you and register in a time when you're probably not on the ice or in the gym or on the field. And the question was, do you think families are going to be hesitant to fully commit to a full year club fee, knowing what's happening this year? Gabe, I want to throw this to you and Troy. What are you hearing about families willing to stay engaged and committed when things are kind of up in the air?
Yeah, I'm still hearing it seems like it's a lot to do with communicating from the club on what those, fees or commitments are going to be, things like if the clubs are going to offer remote training that the kids can do while they're not necessarily with the club, or communicating that the kids will be placed on a team regardless of, if tryouts happen or if the season's going to start late, that there still will be some, semblance of a season or team they'll be on, or even the communication that if seasons don't happen the way they'd expected, keeping the fees to the club or organization so that it can continue. So communicating that, if they don't get the money coming in the door, that it may be very, painful for the club down the road. And I think that as long as you're clear with communication and those expectations, that parents are still in all willing to commit, paying for and committing to the seasons for the clubs. So.
Yeah. Troy, what are you hearing?
He's on mute.
Troy's muted. Let's see if I can.
Oh, we need to unmute Troy. There he is.
Yeah, sorry. Along those same lines that Gabe was talking about, it's it's a little different for everybody depending upon the socioeconomical community they live in, and to be quite honest, what some of the prices are kind of play into that as well. But in general, what we're seeing is the ability that those who are comfortable with it, and those who have long-ranging programs like rec departments or associations with multiple sports, will see the parents and the families, involved in other sports throughout the year. So in those circumstances, it seems that, it's a little more understandable of what the whole program is, 12-month program or offerings that the rec department or the association or club offers. And what we're hearing is those types of settings, it's not as traumatic or challenging to ask to keep the registration fees for other things to keep it going. The ones where it's I'm a part of this club for hockey, that's it. And so it makes it we're hearing it's a little more challenging. But as we kind of alluded to on a couple of weeks ago, when I just threw out there, it's finding the right language to be able to share with your members or your families, however you term them, kind of creating that social currency with them that here, we're going to be providing during this time, here's what we're providing for your athletes, training for the coaches. We have fixed costs. Most people will understand that if it's articulated well. And so I think that's a good, if you have a board or a collective group, to be able to discuss how do we articulate without sounding like we're groveling or, whining about not having enough funds. And I think it's just not necessarily playing on those emotions, but having the ability to show that you want to grow the program, whether it's one sport or multiple sports. And so if part of that is the challenge is you don't know how long this is going to be. Are you going to even get sports in for the summer? But what we're seeing is the ones who are developing some programming now that is virtual or that they can rally behind to say, this is what we're doing right now, so we're not shut down. That's what I think parents, members need to know, as you as an organization you haven't stopped. You still have upkeep, you still want to keep things moving, but this would be a time I would just kind of say to organizations to internally as well, evaluate some of your processes, develop some coach training. How do you evaluate coaches? Talking about job descriptions, expectations, parent expectations, what type of culture, what type of coaching development, best practices, training for officials. And if you can start talking about those issues, revisiting them, but then pushing them out to your members, here's what we're doing coaches training. Here's what type of parent training we have. In Positive Coaching Alliance, we have a huge resource website called PCADevZone.org, and how utilizing some of those training tips to be able to push out to your parents and coaches and athletes is an important part of being able to develop now, but show your members and your families that these are available. This is what we're doing right now. We're strengthening our infrastructure. We're strengthening you, even though we can't be on the field or the ice. And then the last thing we're hearing is, if you're offering, as we talked about earlier, to say we would like to pay our coaches, so we want to retain some of your fees, and here's the training that they're going to be doing virtually. We're hearing a lot of people are using different things, whether it's Zoom, Google Hangout, Flipgrid, but creating some type of contact, and parents, the ones we're talking to, are excited with just the fact that, hey, a coach is connecting with my kids and showing them drills or passing along things they can go out in the yard and do. And that creates that kind of social currency with them.
Thank you. So do others have suggestions about how do you help people stay connected with you when you can't connect in the ways that we normally do? Other ideas from other places?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm Albert Ziako from District Siona. I'm sorry, my English is not very good. I'm gonna do my best to make it clearly.
Oh, we're glad you're here.
Yeah. The other agenda, the thing that I can add on it is, if the parent have like a coach soccer, and I keep working with parents who have like 2 kids or 3 kids, so you can make them come on the ground, playing together. You stay away, just tell them what to do, and you can just watch them doing it and explain to them how to do it. So that's the little thing I was trying to add, like another idea to do it, to make it happen.
Thank you. Other ideas? I think you're muted.
Yeah, that was all. That was all. I'm sorry. I'm still
Okay.
at work. I just have my earphone. I'm listening to you guys.
Oh, we're glad you're here. Um, so the last chunk of questions and issues that comes in every week has to do with return to play. And one of the things I love about this group is we've got baseball and softball and hockey and volleyball and soccer and lacrosse that I know of, and there may be some others. And trying to figure out what does return to play look like in our impatience and our worry. This past week, I saw guidance come out in Australia for all sports. I saw the rugby community in Switzerland and New Zealand come out with protocols and how to come back into the game. In the United States, both Indiana and Utah Youth Soccer came out with some specific protocols. I think Indiana's was like 5 pages long about returning to play. And so at this point, I'm really curious as to what are you seeing in your communities and your sports? What are you now seeing for coming back into play? What protocols and guidelines are popping up where you are?
I can throw one in there that I heard earlier today, and if you guys heard anything like this, but just as far as if you need to follow protocols, and I'm sure you do. One of the suggestions I heard was that they're going to use drones. The organization is to from the air watch that people are at proper distances or not grouping up too much. First time I've heard that. So maybe drones, there's gonna be a big drone business after this to watch at least outdoor sports as people are out on the field and making sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Of course, one of the problems that you might have with drones is that people who operate drones are not always good pilots, and they can actually crash the drones and hurt people. There has been litigation on that.
Oh, something else to worry about.
Yeah, so you have to make sure. And the other thing is you want to make sure that when you fly drones, that you don't violate any federal airspace issues. Like if you're within 5 miles of the airport, you probably can't do it.
Right. Yeah, Stephen says, yeah, there's specific rules for commercial drone flights. So knowing what the rules of the airspace are important. I tend to worry about, even if we come up with a great set of protocols and safety and hygiene and things, the impact on clubs in terms of, are there new expenses? Like now we're going to go buy hand sanitizer, right? Are there new staffing requirements, volunteer requirements for enforcing, policing, encouraging people to do these new things? And that's another kind of commitment on the behalf of organizations. So, in DC, Basma says, in DC, we have restricted airspace as well. So drones seem super unlikely to be approved there. Carol says, there's nothing going on in Massachusetts yet. The mayor of Boston just canceled all outdoor summer activities in Boston, including the 4th of July on the Esplanade. We're just waiting on US club soccer for their guidelines. Carol asks, has anyone seen any studies from the US or Canada with level of risk by sport? I've seen one from Italy, but was quite shocked to see volleyball listed as the highest risk of all sports. Wow. That seems wrong to me. Has anyone seen that? Or maybe studies with level of risk by sport? What a great question.
I haven't seen anything like that, but definitely a good one.
Oh no, I love the question. Love the question. Gandalf says soccer's waiting to hear recommended guidelines from US Youth Soccer on Sunday. Oops. I got mixed up in the screen. expected on Monday, excuse me. U.S. Youth Soccer expected on Monday. Jennifer says, for hockey, it will likely be a gradual step-by-step process. Actually, process, we're talking Canada. With certain criteria needed to progress from one stage to the next, but nothing is set in stone yet. I know the infographic I saw out of Switzerland, which was a rugby thing, had those steps and what the criteria were going step to step for Swiss rugby. Steve says the Aspen Institute has a risk assessment that lists out levels of risk. Ross says, hockey's an interesting one in Canada. Private arenas have started opening up, but keeping groups at 4 athletes and 1 coach at a time in the building. City-owned arenas have all been added as phase 3 openings, so unlikely until July or August. Oh, great. Gandalf has put some information from Italy, a link in the chat, and we'll stick that in the email that we send you out after this so you can get that. Aspen Project Play.org has a return to play assessment tool. We can put that link in as well. Okay, did I miss something?
I was going to say, Ruth, I talked to a couple local customers here in Minnesota too, specifically to hockey, and it sounds like the private groups that are operated businesses are operating, so much so that way as businesses. So like there's some private training centers that are opening as fast as they can. And I know at least in Minnesota that yesterday our governor, and again, this is, state by state, region by region, but the governor of Minnesota had said that he's going to push really hard to get sports in general open because of how important it is to people's he said mental health, which I agree, getting kids out playing, getting people things that they can watch, getting out sports. So opening it up as fast as we can in a safe way. Right. So figuring that out, but he's pushing hard to get stuff open here in Minnesota. Our governor is. So. Yeah,
it is attention, isn't it? I happen to live in the neighborhood that had some of the first cases and first deaths here in Washington State, and this is day, what is this, 69 of being at home under an emergency, a state of emergency. So it's been a long time in the house with the dog.
Well, one thing to consider in these questions of opening up sport is that the public policy is to support the free play of sports, and the courts have always taken that position as well. And so when you actually look at lawsuits that have, result in published decisions in every state, you will see a very consistent ruling in favor of defendants because of the court's reluctance to interfere with the free play of sport. And so, of course you want to act properly and follow guidelines, and you want to make sure that you don't, break any laws in, proceeding forward with play. But on the other hand, you have to weigh, the value versus the risk.
Yeah. So Matt Miller is asking, as he's looking ahead, if sport organizers are concerned with keeping kids in the game, with retaining kids, if their families that because of the situation aren't working right now, and it means putting food on the table or registering their kids in sport, is the situation going to end up where we lose kids out of the sports that we enjoy so much? Do folks have something for Matt on that?
I'll throw in, Ruth. I think a couple of things that we recommend is staying connected right now so they feel a part of it. We know many youth are participating in sports, not necessarily just because they want to play at the next level. It's a social time. It's a release time. It's a daycare time. It's many things. And so to keep them feeling connected I think it's every youth sports goal to get them to play the next year, whatever sport or age it is. So during this time, the more connected you can keep them, and it's not always just hands or feet on the ball or stick. It's do they feel connected that to the coach, to the player, to the association, to the family feel? It's some of those things I mentioned earlier, that you're meeting some needs and partnering with them, not just on the field skills and drills, but keeping them connected, I think will help retain them. Showing those resources and that this is a greater family. I think more than any time, people are finding ways to stay connected, and that's going to be vital for youth organizations to get return, to get continued support. Is during this time, how connected are you is a major factor.
Yeah, and is your sense that helps, Troy? Because things are so uncertain, and trying to manage connection with uncertainty when you really don't know when things will get back to normal.
You don't know. No, that's so true. And I've talked to many sports organization leaders that get kind of paralyzed because they don't know what to do. And I want to put the best thing out there. I want it to be state of the art. I want it to be groundbreaking. I think a lot of it is just that connection. People's ideals now are a little lower. I don't mean that bad, but just staying that part connected. And I think it's just a big part of it. And you're right, Ruth, on the fact that some people, it will be a financial factor. And that's what we would recommend and hear from other organizations to say, keep the financial factor in there if it is, meaning refund to keep them happy. But I don't know about you, but where you are in Washington, people have got to just be going stir crazy. So they're just looking for that type of connection where, how can you keep my kids involved mentally? We have a thing in Minnesota where we started, and a local NBC station is airing them. We're having kids write a letter to their sport. Dear volleyball, I miss you. This is what I've learned from you. But just kind of a therapeutic expression to write a letter. And maybe an association or a club could start that campaign. Maybe there's a local restaurant that will give some gift certificates out if a kid writes a letter saying how they miss it. Or the other way around. The club or association, are you communicating how much you miss the kids and the families? So some creative ways, especially with young kids, doesn't take a lot, but to keep them interested.
So Ross has a question about kids in sport that don't have regular access to technology. It's easy to forget, as we're sitting here on Zoom, that not everybody has a computer at home or easy access to technology. And in some ways, some of those kids are our most vulnerable and the ones that, we really want to keep in sport. What are y'all's ideas about how do you help not make that socioeconomic gap worse and keep connection with folks who can't just, hop into the back room and hop on a Zoom call? Carol says she shares the concern about keeping kids playing in the sport. The ones she's also concerned for are the high performance athletes who want to play post-secondary or for youth or junior national teams, and the long-term impact on those and their ability to go to the next level. So sort of both ends of the spectrum, if you will.
Yeah, Ruth, we're hearing from lots of organizations that could be more of a long-term concern, where if we're shut down for 6 months, 8 months, we can't play fall sports, they can't get into a gym or a club till, winter, or those times. I think I heard this from a Division I coach who shared this on a podcast that said, by and large, every of those types of kids, elite or high performance, they're all experiencing this, right? So that playing field's kind of plateau or is similar. So there is that part of it, but I also think it's, it's been able to segment out who are our novice just learning the game, and then high performers that maybe there's a way to segment them out somehow to give them those extra training. The last thing that I would share that we've heard is those high performers are challenging themselves even greater now than they have before, without a coach or without things. So I think we can be attuned to them, but I think, it's still in a good state with them for now. If it prolongs, that could be a bigger issue for sure.
So let's go back to Ross's question, which was about the kids that don't necessarily have easy access to technology. Are there those of you that have some things you're doing to help connect with those kids? There was an article here out of Portland, Oregon, a soccer club there who have a great number of kids who don't have access to a lot of resources, and the soccer club has actually backed off of soccer per se, and is now doing things like supporting the local food bank and checking in with their families just to make sure that their basic needs are being met. They're physically okay. What are others doing for the kids that are in those situations? Anyone?
So Ruth, this is Yvonne Bonilla with Waconia Soccer Club in community education.
Good to see you
Sorry,
again.
I was in a car with a couple of dogs, and I just didn't want to risk barking while I came back from the vet's office. Just so you know, so one of the things that we've done, so I've been, as a director of coaching with the club, I've been communicating with coaches and families, and we've done a couple of things. For the kids that have technology, we've used Flipgrid to post videos and have videos for different training methods. For the kids that don't have technology, what I've done is basically I've provided my contact information to the families, and a few of them have taken advantage of this. They've called me, and I basically walk them through very simple exercises that are easy to explain over the phone, that they can utilize if mom or dad have a temporary phone right there, that they can, if there's a video access, I can kind of show them on the video. But if not, I can walk them through just some basic exercises that they can do every day to remain active with the ball, to remain active physically, whether strength and conditioning or other activities. So those are things that we are doing as a club to try to keep the engagement of kids that don't have technology, but still want to participate in the game, and they still want to basically keep their touches going.
Thank you. Thank you. It's good to hear your voice again. It's been a while. Oh,
back in the olden days, people would actually have that on paper, and you could actually mail them or fax them like instructions, by paper.
Yeah.
I was actually going to say that too. My idea is go old school with the kids that, actually, so in the school district here, we're in St. Louis Park, Minnesota, I've got 4 kids. They're doing for families that don't have technology, and there certainly are families that don't or prefer not to. The school is doing paper packets and sending them out, as much as that seems, it's counter technology, but doing the same for your kids, printing out maybe 10 pages of paper that's got some, stick people showing them how to do the drills, and then just giving them some stuff that they can do at home when they're, not with the club if they don't have access to that technology package.
All right. So we've got just a few more minutes, and one of the things we want to do at the end of this, 2 weeks ago, you all did something amazing. I was so happy. Gabe's still laughing at me. Because the group, you all started saying, hey, next week, we want to talk about this. Next week, we have this question. So I want to throw it to you because we're doing this every Friday at, I'll say 1 o'clock Pacific, 3 o'clock Central Time. What's on your mind that you want to talk about next week? Anyone? You've run out of questions already? Well, the good news is, for the questions that come to you at 1 a.m. in the morning, we'll have a link up next week for next week's conversation. There'll be a follow-up email that'll have the recording of this conversation. When you register, let us know you're coming next Friday. You can always pop in a question or an issue. Let us know what's on your mind. And if we don't have immediate access to the resources, we know folks like Catherine and others in our contact book that we can invite to help with your conversations and your questions and getting through this really odd time. Any last questions, comments?
I think by next week we'll have a lot of interesting things to look at with what's just changed in a week, because it seems to be everything's changing week to week a lot. So. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like U.S. youth soccer and U.S. club soccer will probably have something out in the soccer world. I'm expecting some other places. Like I said, I've seen stuff from Australia and Switzerland, and we'll see what other countries come up with interesting ideas too. So thank you for being with us. We hope to see you next week.